So, hello everyone, it's Ramadan. Welcome to the fasting month. It's not easy. I just had my iftar, couple of hours earlier. By the way, I have a email that I have shared on Facebook. It seems like I'm having a new job, like it's your application for Kamyab Jawan Startup Pakistan is approved. And it says that, "Hi Altaf Khan, congratulations. Your application to join Prime Minister's Startup Pakistan program is now approved. Your acceptance in this program is an opportunity for you to start your own blah blah blah. There are a couple of stages, then I'll be able to start my own new business." I don't know who sent this, but it sounds really stupid. It shows how the government is preparing that profile of people without even, they're just throwing emails. But that's none of our business. Today we are into one of the most interesting parts of our study. This is the part that I think you should learn, and anybody who's interested in international journalism, I know many people know a lot about it, they should really think about it. The title is Our Man in Havana in Williams' book. The very title shows that they are talking about a group of journalist professionals who work in countries which don't have favorable relationships with their home countries, and they have to overcome a lot of difficulties to cover that area. Why is that? Because most of the time they have to tailor events in another country according to the tastes of their home audiences, like what they call as making foreign news local, and also like telling the story to a local audience who don't know much about it. And this is one problem of international journalism. As we discussed in the earlier lecture in the colonial legacy, that in the beginning it was kind of they were really telling stories, like there was little truth about it and nobody was interested of where the truth lies, but people wanted to know about certain other parts of the world that they used to fancy, and the weaker parts of the world were sold as amusement elements, more of a human interest story. But here we are talking about established structures of journalism. We'll begin with how do we divide international correspondence, which are the categories. So there is staff correspondent, there is a general reporter, and there is stringer. These are the three main categorization. Like the staff correspondent is somebody who is assigned to cover an area regularly. That's the guy who will just cover a region, a part of a country or something like that. And then we have a general reporter who comes in and who covers specific areas. Like most of these are experts, if we can call them. And then there is the stringer. The stringers are people who work either with one or two organizations, or they work with more than one organization, or they just sell stories according to the money they get. Some people also call them flingers. But before the beginning of this organized structure that we have right now, we used to have historically what we call the long stay correspondents. Long stay correspondents had a huge cultural advantage over others, and these were the correspondents which really won international journalism and international reporting a huge prestige. And these were the people because of whom every organization used to boast about their guys in other countries, because they were bringing in stories and they were bringing in information, and they were packaging that information in such a way that people used to listen to that. People used to wait for those stories, to know about those distant lands which were kind of mysterious, not very well known, and stuff like that. And also this dominance over of the West over the barbaric East, the proverbial barbaric East, like the white guys, my apologies to all my friends who are white, doing good things and saving the world and what their governments were doing to help people and how stupid the people in those countries were. You can just read any international story covered by an international organization, and you would just see this pattern evolving, like the stupidity of the locals and the generosity and wisdom of the West and the success of the Western structure and all these things. Like this is what it is. So these journalists were there to get news. The most advantageous positions were the qualities that a journalist should have, that they should have traveled. If you are a candidate for an international journalist position, these are very good advantages. You might have traveled to a country that you are interested in, and you should be knowing about that country. And if you know the language, for example, if you come to Pakistan and you have a flair for Urdu, that's good. And if you are really into war and terror and you know Pashto, you're really well off. I think it's dying, but still, it's an advantage. So we see that besides doing objective journalism and your journalism capacity, there's kind of a traveling and your interest in other cultures, which is very important. So that's another thing that made international correspondence very attractive. And there is also the way that you cover stories. Like many journalists are known for their audacity to go into go after the stories, and they become kind of legends. They are big names. Like German journalist Peter Schalato was captured by the Viet Cong, and he was there for almost 3 years. Nobody knew where he was, and when they found him again, Schalato was there teaching students, like small children. So he was there and he said, "You won't get anything to kill by killing me, or whatever you wish to do. I have no worth. Nobody will exchange any prisoners in my name," and nobody knew where he was. And then the guy just remained there. He just assimilated into that society, and that ability is always very much prized in international journalism, like going what we call going native. But going native is not always liked by parent organizations, but because once you are into a culture and you go native, you really would like to give the truth about that society, the good and the bad together, and also you would like to give international perspective. You feel your responsibility to be an international storyteller, and your beat is not kind of a South Africa beat or a Middle East beat or a South Asia beat. You will start looking at a world from a very different perspective, and this is something that organizations don't like most of the time, and they call it going native, or another term for it is going stale. Like you have no use for parent organization, because the parent organization has an agenda, and they will always like you to work within that frame of agenda. You are not able to do that. You are not useful, and they would like to replace you. One of the reasons that organizations, besides many other reasons, are not putting much money into what we call the long stay correspondents is that they can't afford people going native and people going stale. They want them to follow a specific line, to tell the story according to tastes and expectations of the local audience, and also to satisfy their governments, because till date international journalism is considered to be something which is in some way kind of a handmaiden to diplomacy, or a sister of governance, an international and the foreign office. And it also see that in most cases there is a lot of surveillance by the parent countries of journalists who are working in distant land. They always keep a check on them, And they really don't want them to do a bad story. The bad story meaning where the international interests of a Western country is somehow endangered, and that's basically a huge problem. And then we see that, I just don't want to go wayward, that I put in stuff that is not undergrad stuff, and I go into areas which is not useful for you as undergrads. So one other thing is that there is a pecking order of journalists basically, and the pecking order basically is based upon who are the most important guys. Like I always mention Liz Doucet. If Liz Doucet arrives at a scene, it means that this is going to be a big story. And so there are people who are at different levels, even within international journalists, because they have established a lot. They have risked their lives a lot. Risking your life is a plus. And many international journalists have lost their lives going after the story, like going off base, for example. You don't see them anymore. They lose contact with their parent organization because they really want to go deep in for the story, which might endanger them. Like they would not like to their organizations to know about their whereabouts. Daniel Bell, for example, is a big example of when going off base, how dangerous going off base could be. This is the biggest example in Pakistan, but in Afghanistan, many international journalists were killed. They were after the story and they just wanted to know what's going on. So this curiosity at times, which is one of the hallmarks of good journalism, international journalism, is also dangerous in a way. Now the daily grid, as we say, how do we do international stories? Like international stories are not simply news. Like if somebody in the US is sitting in front of their television and they want to watch and know, they would like to have a feel of things, like kind of how do you feel about happenings? And most of in many cases, if you see an international correspondent narrating a story, there is a question which comes up so very often: how do you feel? What do you think is going on? And there is the answer to that question is from a hunch to really good grasp of that subject matter. Now, if you are a parachute journalist, like you just went there, a general reporter, and you are just sent there to cover the story with very minimal information, with least understanding of culture and having least context, you will most of the time go for a hunch. But if you are an established person who know people, who might know the language and who has study of the region, your hunch, your feel will be very important. That's where international journalism has an advantage over the other journalists. And also there are what we call, because of the technology, we are seeing that the role of international correspondent is being taken over. Like instead of foreign correspondent, we are seeing native local people doing international journalism, and these are the guys who take the role of that journalist, of that reporter. But the question here is that this guy who's local is not allowed to have a story of his own or her own. They are always strongly monitored that they fit into the role of the Western correspondent. They are not allowed to have initiative of their own. Their guidelines are very strict, and also control over their activity is also quite strict. So they have to imitate their predecessor. They are international journalists, but with a difference. They are there to just fill the place and give the same content. Their own opinion doesn't matter. Which brings us to the last point for today, because I'll stretch it in two videos, which will be more useful. Is that like news gatherers are many. Like there are local foreign and foreign local news gatherer. Like local foreign is local, like local organization asking to give a story about international events, and they just make use of information that you have. And then kind of the foreign local is basically going into some place and doing journalism for that. And then there are these do-it-yourself journalists. Like they do everything. They collect information, they finalize the story. They don't send information. They have the full story. They'll send it to you. You want to buy it, good. You don't want to buy it, they'll sell it to some other person. And this is a very interesting development, because young men and women are increasingly getting into this frame. But the advice that I'll give them is, because these are amateur reporters and they are active and passive. The passive ones are the ones who will collect data like bloggers or vloggers, and they will form a story with searching around for news, and then they will present it. The active ones are really good, and these are the most important amongst those. Active ones, they have kind of an understanding of their own. I'll advise these young men and women to read more about areas that they would like to cover, and the more areas that they would like to represent, because simply having photos, a video, or just getting your sources from simply everyday news circle will not get you anywhere. We'll discuss this later in another video very soon to cover this whole topic. Thank you.